Hi everyone, welcome back to another Customer Futures conversation. I'm very excited today to be joined by Kirsty Rutter from Lloyds Banking Group and Dave Birch from 15 Megabits. And we'll hear from them in a minute. But today we are digging into agentic commerce, the fact that AI is not just generative anymore, but AI agents can now do things, and specifically talk about what does that mean, not just when businesses have them, but when customers have them. Because Dave and Kirsty have been thinking about this for much longer than most people. And when everyone's only now just waking up to the fact this is going to change the front door of a bank and a retailer when customers show up with more power, more information, automation, but also it's going to change things like risk. It's going to change how we think about identity and so on. So, Kirsty, can I jump to you quickly to do a quick intro, and then we can talk a bit about how you got here and this paper you've written with Dave.
Thanks, Jamie. Hi, everybody. Kirsty Rutter. I have been at Lloyds 6 years now. 4 of those years, I have been building the fintech investment capability, which I started from a blank piece of paper and a pitch to the CEO. And we make investments that are of strategic value to the bank, seed to Series B. And I enjoy sitting on the boards of those companies and working with those founders and making great things happen with the bank. So that's my day job. From how did we get here? So Dave and I have known each other for quite a few years now. In fact, I'm not going to look back. Dave refused I got fascinated with identity, and the story goes, Dave refused to connect with me on LinkedIn because he only will connect with people who he's physically met. So I stalked him to a speaker set that he did somewhere in Canary Wharf many years ago and said, right, now you've met me, you can connect with me because I really enjoyed your book and I want to do more. And that was the start. Dave and I both enjoy thinking about where the world is going, and we both come at it from different angles. Mine is I've been in banking for too many years and in very different roles across the bank. So I enjoy many different perspectives. Dave's typically much more technical. I will look much more at the customer and the commercial angle and how operationally you're going to execute on this. And so we came together because we were both mulling over what does the rumbles of agentic technology mean. We got together and wrote our first paper in 23. And then more recently, so the paper that you mentioned, Jamie, was published this summer in the Journal of Digital Banking. And that's all about what happens when the consumer, the customer, so us as individuals, have an agent operating on our behalf. What happens to the bank, to the model, and how do we have to lean into that to stay relevant?
Brilliant. Dave, you've been thinking about identity for longer than most people have been thinking about, the disruptive technology, and put AI together with identity, and you get a very complicated picture that you've been navigating and trying to unpick and talk very sensibly about for a few years now. So, how did you get to this point? And tell me a bit more about what's in the paper now that they produced in the summer.
Well, the thing is that the paper we wrote originally was about, which came out of a workshop that we were doing at the bank. The point of the paper originally was, hold on a second, in all of our strategic planning, we're still thinking of customers as being people. But if you look at the horizon, that doesn't look like it's going to be true for much longer. So let's have a think about that. And then and I think we're a bit ahead of the curve on that, to be honest. And then the second paper said, okay, if that's right, then what should the strategy be? And because, obviously by that time we knew that the paper was right. So then it made sense to say, okay, well, now let's look at what the actual strategy should be. And of course, once you start thinking about that, there are certain things that come up. And in the paper, we specifically refer to the issue of digital identity and the idea of wallets that are being managed by bots, basically, rather than by people. And so the question of, well, okay, when your customers suddenly become 1,000 times smarter overnight, which is what will happen, how does that change the business? And there are certain things we know about that. You remember the known knowns and the known unknowns and all that sort of thing. So, for example, we know that as of approximately today, there's approximately £300 billion sitting in accounts in the UK earning no interest whatsoever. And you think, well, that's a bit puzzling because obviously there's lots of accounts that pay interest, however minimal it might be. Why aren't? And the truth is, people are busy. They've got other things to do. That money is inertial. You can market to those people on certain assumptions. But bots don't have anything else to do. I mean, the idea that bots would leave money just sitting there doing nothing. And I mean, one of the examples that we quite often use, because it's easy to explain to people, is when you start talking about things like frequent flyer miles and loyalty points. Like, a lot of those business models are based on the fact that you never actually use any of the points or do anything with it. What happens when bots make sure that those points are used and current business models can't survive? So this isn't just about banks, but it's, and I don't think I'm stepping out of line by saying, I just think, and banks are uniquely vulnerable in this space because their products are so commoditized. There is. I'm embarrassed to say it in front of but is there really any difference between my Lloyds Bank savings account and my Barclays Bank savings account or my any other bank savings account? And broadly speaking, the answer is no. It's trivial for bots to compare them, and once you add in open banking and so on, yeah. So the first paper was, hold on, let's look up at the horizon. Can we see what's coming? Well, one of the things we can see coming is AI. And then the second paper was, okay, that appears to be true. So now what should the strategy in banks be? That's the kind of context for it. And I should say, by the way, and there are two, from my kind of slightly narrower, more technical point of view, there's two bits of fallout from that, which I've discussed, many times with Kirsty about this. So one is, and I mean, you're going to be bored hearing me talking about this, but, one is identity and one is money. So in other words, what are we going to do about identity in this space? And what are we going to do about payments in this space? And, I wrote a companion paper about what to do about identity with Yelena Hoffart from MasterCard. And I wrote a companion paper about what to do about payments with Debbie Gamble for Interac. So I think you can see all these things coalescing together now, basically. Yeah.
See, I think this is so interesting because the idea of bots have largely been negative. It's like, that's a bad bot. There's someone coming, it's a script that's been written to try and hit the front door of a website and pack credentials and try username and password combinations. And so, we spent 2 decades at least putting up kind of barbed wire and alligators to stop the bots. Are you a human? Check. And we're clicking on pictures of fire hydrants and boats and bridges and stuff, which is insane. And now AI's come in, we're saying, well, actually the AIs can do that. But this is the next step, saying, well, we don't have to look out for the bad bots, but we have to work out for the good bots as well. Is this Dave's agent? And not only is it Dave's agent, he's going to have 17 of them, and they're going to be doing slightly different things, and they might be chained together. And how do we know that Dave's agent's other agent is related to Dave's first agent? So the idea of, delegated authority, digital identity is a mess. Agents aren't going to have driving licenses that we scan the front and back of. And it's going to change all our assumptions. And I think so many businesses are going to get whiplash because they've got all these, let's keep the bots out. Well, now the really forward-thinking businesses are thinking, well, let's let the good bots in. But that's a really challenging matter. Kirsty, how are you thinking about that shift? Not only, technically, but the businesses having to think about, well, how do we create an agentic channel? How do we work out which is a good signal from a customer that we should be engaging with because it drives revenue, lowers risk, improves customer experience. How are you thinking about that?
So I'm going to put that into two pieces, Jamie. One is the front end and how you engage with the customer and starting to explore agentic technologies at that interface point. So Lloyds has been public about exploring this space and starting to bring agents into the customer bank interface. So seeing it in the app, and that, like any new technology, will evolve as things learn, right? So that from a how is it going to show up? It's happening. And I'm excited that the work that Dave and I have done is starting to show up in the organizations and the organization that I work in. So that's fabulous. I think the challenge piece for really lands in the operating model that sits then behind how you interface. So me picking up my digital banking app and being able to engage using a bot, that will be a first step, right? But the vision that Dave and I have played out in this paper is actually I'm going to not need to engage with my bank in that way at all over time. And so the steps towards the outcome that Dave and I foresee, which might be a while away, but it's coming, is the operating model where you as a customer are engaging with your bank through your mobile app is substituted for me as a customer talking to my bot and the bank bot talking to my bot. So I'm on a beach somewhere and I speak to my agent and my agent says, "Oh, what do you need me to do?" I say, "Yeah, you don't need to tell me what to do because you know my mortgage is up in a couple of months and what matters to me is X because you know me, right? So go off and find out where my offer is and at some point when you know me so well and I trust you, you're just going to execute it anyway. You don't need my permission. Inherently you have my permission and the system will know you have my permission." But if you look then at the technical interface, which is bot to bot on the bank side, that is a whole new way of connecting with your customer. It's not through an app. It's not through a branch. It's in the cyberspace of bot to bot land. And that means the operating model that has existed and worked in traditional banks for many, many decades, some would say centuries versions of, suddenly gets very disrupted because what I actually care about as a bank is how I technically show up, whether my API version of is secure, recognizes the interaction, operates fast enough, because my personal Kirsty bot is going to get very dismissive if all the information I've asked for isn't there in 30 seconds and I can't come back and tell I can't tell Kirsty that actually your best mortgage option is X because technically you're not able to tell me what I need to know. So you've opened up a completely different, and this is why I find this topic absolutely fascinating, is that the operating model can't be developed from where we are today because everything channels from that bot to bot interface. That's the output point.
And the thing is, we want it to be a bot to bot interface because what we don't want, I mean, a bank, what we don't want, in fact, you've already seen this in the retail space because, Amazon have already filed that lawsuit against Perplexity to stop them from buying things on their site with the bot. I saw a thing from the CTO at Walmart saying, we don't want bots coming to our website. We don't want bots using our APIs. They were never designed for those things. That's why we're building our bot, because we want the customer bot to talk to our bot. And you can imagine that the customer bot and the bank bot can have much more sophisticated interactions. They can do much more complex things together. And actually, even the simple things, I think, for most people, it's quite boring. And so if a bot will, I'll take the standard middle class example, on March the 31st, we've all got to panic and work out which ISA we're going to open and get some money into an ISA at the last minute, all of a sudden, if we've got any money left over at the end of the year. Well, the idea that I could make a better choice of ISA than a kind of even the most rudimentary finance bot seems laughable to me, even if I did want to waste the day looking at it again, which I really don't. So a lot of these things are standardized, commoditized. It's relatively easy for bots to make some choices about them. But this leads just to, and this is a thing that Kirsty pointed out in the original paper, which was that although the customer won't be choosing the products and services, they will be choosing the bot. So, and I assume there are some rules about this. You could imagine that the bots have to be FCA authorized. They have to in some way implement the FCA duty of care and so on. But other than that, would a customer choose like a Greta Thunberg bot to do their finances for them, or an Elon Musk bot? Or I think most people in Britain would probably just hand it over to the Martin Lewis bot to sort of sort it all out for them. And actually, for most people, that's probably actually the best way to do it. I do wonder if, spending all of this money on financial literacy is really what, remember half of Generation Z get their financial advice from TikTok. So, should we really be wasting money trying to educate them, or should we just say, I'm sorry, you're not allowed to use your bank account until you've passed your driving license. So up until then, your bot has to do it for you. Well, fine, because in 10 years' time, they won't be allowed to drive in cities because it'll be too dangerous. So they'll be used to the fact that they have to have cars drive for them until they've passed some sort of special license. So I don't know. It just seems to me that the natural state for most people will be having bots do this. It's not that interesting to people. They're confused by it. There's no real evidence they'd make better choices. In fact, there's every assumption they wouldn't. So I don't know. Would a responsible bank, Kirsty, allow people access to their own accounts? I don't know if it would. I think that's playing with fire, letting people have access to their own money.
Yeah, I think there's a really interesting thread here about, and Kirsty, you mentioned the word permission a couple of times. That person on the beach who wants to outsource, delegate. We're into questions about trust, and that's brand trust. Who's going to, where's that marketplace of bots that I get to choose and who gets to run them?
Exactly.
And the regulators are going to have huge questions about commercial models and kickbacks and recommendations and all that kind of good stuff. There's so many new questions. This is good disruption, right? We're shaking things up, and sometimes 100-year-old operating models. But where are we can imagine bots working for people, but do you have a sense of how that might play out in the market? Is this an Apple Google play? Is it, spoon.com that gets spun up next week by two teenagers in their bedrooms? Like, how's this going to show up in the market?
To your point, Jamie, it's emerging. So we haven't got all the answers yet. However, there are a few assumptions I think it's probably safe to make. One is, I think in the paper I refer to as the bot agency, which is, who is going to manage that layer, that interface? Who's going to regulate it? Where does it? Don't know the answers to that, but what I do know is what we're really doing is we're shifting the regulatory layer happens in that interface of the bot to bot point, whereas at the moment the regulatory bit happens in the bank. So we're also moving the layer, that permissioning layer is, you have to be able to regulate it. Previous to this, I spent a whole load of time embedding controls in software, because if you're not compliant in the code, you end up spending a lot of money layering on remedial or clipboard reviews, however you want to term it. And I think a lot of the time and energy now needs to go into how do you structure that compliance layer in that interface point such that you're compliant, you know why and what you've done, and there is the audit trail. Because the question that comes usually as part of this conversation is liability. And then who's liable when my bot goes a bit bonkers and does something I never told it to, even though it's telling the bot it's talking to that it has permission to do it, even though I said no. So where are the break points in that process? Where are those controls that mean that I can evidence that I didn't do it? But am I liable for my bot, even if it goes a bit bonkers? Like that, that's not worked out yet, right? That's where it gets really interesting and difficult. I think it's going to be difficult.
I think there's a couple of things there. First of all, we're sort of rather lazily saying bot. My bot's going to access the bank bot. That's not really what's happening. What's really happening is there's a network of bots accessing a network of bots, and the permissions are going to be far more granular than, it's not going to be simply, yes, you can do what you like with my bank account. And also remember, the regulators are going to be bots as well. So the complexity of what you can have much more complex regulation that's implemented in order to provide safety, reduce risk or whatever, but you can do it cost effectively, which is sort of slightly different. And I think that these network, there was a thing was it The Economist? I can't remember now. I read a thing a couple of months ago, I think it was The Economist, where they were interviewing a woman who had a virtual boyfriend that did various things for her. And she said, she was Chinese, and she used a wonderful phrase. She said, she because she had a bot to do this and a bot to do that. And she said, it's like I'm the empress of the court and they're my ministers. And I thought that was kind of a really kind of lovely way of making me think about it in a non-technical point of view. It's like, yes, you're going to be like you're going to have these ministers. You're going to have your minister of finance and, minister of travel and minister, and they're controlling networks of bots that interact with each other. Now, in a way, I think, and so the idea would be like, I'll get a much better service out of all of this because these bots are smart and I'm not particularly. But, to Kirsty's point, we have to think through essentially, I mean, I'll use the card words for it because it's easy for me, but we're going to have to think through interchange and we're going to have to think through liability. Who gets paid when things work the way they're supposed to work, and who gets paid when things go wrong? And yes, we're a long way from sorting that out, but at least we do recognise that it's there, right, Kirsty? I mean, it's not like we didn't think about it.
And part of the paper, because when we get to liability, well, who's involved? We need to understand who's acting and who's participating, and how does that get traced back to a natural person, whether it's an organisation or an individual. And Dave, in the paper, you talked about some of the identity infrastructure that's going to be needed. That's a long-running theme in your work. But specifically talk to us about wallets and how you think that's going to show up.
Well, I mean, the reason why we focused on wallets in the paper was because, well, for two reasons, really. So first of all, as things stand at the moment, of course, bots can't have bank accounts. I mean, they're not allowed to. They're not natural persons for all this sort of thing. So bots can't have bank accounts, but they can have wallets. And so the idea that a lot of the wallet stuff that's going on right now, which is really fun and interesting. I mean, the way wallets are developing, you've got the EU digital identity wallet coming along next year as well. But you already see what Apple and Google are doing with driving licenses and passports and stuff like that. The idea that it will be a bot controlling the wallet rather than a person, I think is really rather interesting. And I can imagine a situation where, I mean, this isn't quite how things work at the moment in the sort of early stages of the agentic commerce stuff that's in place. But the idea that your bot goes to John Lewis and John Lewis says, well, who the hell are you? And the bot produces a credential which John Lewis can check, and there's a trust framework and all this kind of thing. Well, actually, the building blocks of that stuff already exist. I mean, we already have most of that. This doesn't require someone to invent some incredible new technology. We just need to sort out a couple of things. We just need to sort out liability, no big deal. We just need to sort out a couple of things, like where are the keys stored and that sort of stuff. But actually, in terms of the mechanics of pulling it together, if wallets are the organizing principle, I personally think are not that complex. I think we already have the bits and pieces. And actually, if you look at what, for example, in Google AP2, they've already got the slots in there for the intent mandates and the what do they call it? The payment mandate. They don't call it payment mandate, but the cart mandate. They're already verifiable credentials, and we already have all the standards we need to make that work. So I'm kind of optimistic about using wallets as the organizing principle going forward.
Because I think that's an interesting part in itself, that when we talk about wallets, people assume it's the visual layer, and I've got these kind of digital.
Yeah. No, we don't mean that.
It's the ability to sign a bit of data and that to live somewhere that we trust and we can biometrically check it's me.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing as open banking, isn't it? It's like, you need a directory, and you need, so when my bot shows up at Lloyds are, okay, what bot is this? Okay, hello, I'm bot number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, what are you allowed to do? Well, I'm allowed to access Dave Birch's bank account and do the, wait a minute, who said? Well, Dave Birch said, here's a certificate. Like, I don't think any of this is so complex we can't imagine how it's going to be done. I think we sort of know it.
So I think just to build on that, one of the things that is going to be a bit complicated is when we move into a totally digital environment. In this scenario, everything is operating on permissions, ones and zeros. Can I, can't I, can I, can't I? We go one step back into the rules and the regulations that then have to be complied with, one of the challenges I think we're going to face into, particularly in the UK with our regulatory regime, is it's principles based rather than rules based. And so there's a degree of interpretation that allows flexibility, which is why people love the UK legal system and the regulatory system. However, in a completely digital environment, that's hard because the way that one organization interprets rule principle X versus rule principle Y versus another one may end up, I mean, maybe that's how the arbitrage happens between the bot decision making. Don't know, but it's going to be hard to codify consistently if we look at standards in this space.
It's a very accurate observation. So I mean, yes, there are some people that like the English legal system, lawyers principally. Is that the best way to organise things? Not obvious. Kirsty's right to highlight this issue about principles. It does mean that things like the FCA duty of care are going to have to be written in such a way that they can be interpreted by AIs. I mean, you can't conceive of, you can't have millions of people at the FCA that are combing through the statements from the providers of these agents to ensure they can play. That just won't work. So the duty of care has to be implemented in a way that's understandable to the. But I mean, again, I don't see this as some insurmountable barrier to getting things done. This issue about, it's very analogous in my mind to this. You remember all the fuss about machine readable handbooks, Kirsty, a few years ago? It was like, none of the handbooks were machine readable. And if we made them machine readable, it would make life so much easier for everybody. And so, well, the handbooks are machine readable now. And it just means you have more new products and more new services and so on. So, yeah, I think we understand how that works.
What's really interesting here is the direction of travel's actually becoming clearer. The specifics about the regulation and the specifics on the wallets and the bot-to-bot channel, whether it's A2A or MCP or one of the other interfaces that are starting to emerge, that was going to come out in the wash. The direction of travel of customers getting their own agents, I think, is inevitable. And the paper you've written kind of starts to set out the capabilities that might be needed, including wallets, but also this new agentic channel that banks and other organizations are going to have to meet customers where they are, whether they like it or not. This is not a choice for organizations.
It says in the paper, will the bot essentially become the face of the bank? Insofar as everyone else's bots don't care about the TV ad or which football team you sponsor or this sort of thing. And the answer is, that may well be true. That may well be true. In which case, one of the strategies that the larger banks could adopt is essentially to become giant high volume pipes, which essentially provide the best possible service to bots.
If you play it forward to the universe operates bot to bot in a financial context, in that scenario, price is your only differentiator. But if you play that back into who and how do I want to be represented? So who's going to represent? Is it Greta? Is it which character, which persona is going to be in the market representing me? Would imply that there are some things that I care about which offer an opportunity for product development. And so there's also and I think that will be a strategic choice for institutions, which is, do you just want to distribute at speed, at price, or are there other things that societally matter? And so you can differentiate yourself on product design. And it's that is the new regime.
So if we think about 2026, how fast is this coming? Because I can see some parts of this moving very quickly and other parts struggling to keep up. So Kirsty, how are you thinking? What's the from a Lloyd's perspective about what we should be moving quickly against and which things you think will take longer?
So we're already in market talking about the fact that we recognize that bots and customers are going to come together. And so there's work and already showing up in the CX, in the customer experience side for Lloyds. That for me is it's there, it's happening, it will mature, and each organization will choose how and how they want to be reflected. I think the scenario, which is some years away, given all the stuff that we've talked about needs to be in place, is more challenging in the actual operating model to service the bot-to-bot direct, not quite no human in the loop, but the human is at the start of the communication, not at the end of the communication. That requires the operating model, the regulators, the rules, that end-to-end engagement model is going to take work and time, my view. And I don't think, and this is a very personal view, I don't think you can start with the principles of where you want to get to, but you can't use the design of today's organizations to get there. And so that's going to be challenging, because you've got the today and the tomorrow. And I think for most organizations, the challenge and the opportunity is going to be, okay, at what point do we move from one to the other, and how are we going to do it?
Dave, what do you think are the things to be watching out for? What are the signals that this is coming faster than we think?
Well, I mean, the things that I'm watching out for are kind of a lower level, because what I'm interested in is how are the protocols evolving, how are the stacks developing, how are the and things like what would be a good example? Things like HSM in the cloud and stuff like that. So I'm interested in the building blocks and what's coming together there. One thing that is noticeable, I think, is that and I think it's kind of a bit of a stereotype to say this kind of thing, but it's like it's the kids in university now building stuff in their garage, which is going to be we're at the start of this. The idea that we know how AI is going to play out is clearly laughable. That can't possibly be true. So in a way, the way we're thinking about things probably isn't radical enough. Is my honest answer. Once those building blocks are in place, I have a feeling people will do some amazing things with them. I don't think that I don't think that people are going to instantly go. I mean, some people will, like me. As soon as I'm offered a bot that will deal with British Airways, so I don't have to, I'll be like, I'm all in. I think some people, it will take some time before they feel comfortable. But I kind of see it as a bit similar to people going around in self-driving taxis. You try it once or twice as a novelty, and it's fun, and you're kind of, how does this work, and whatever. And then by the time it's fourth or fifth time, you just don't care. And why would you want a taxi with a person in it? Because they're annoying. So, I think we're heading the same way.
Well, getting rid of the annoying bots, not the Clippies of the world, which was constantly interrupting, to actually having something that's working with me. And
how much richer the communication between bots would be compared to people? Even just like simple things like fraud. When this happens to all of us now, you try and send some money to somebody, the money doesn't go through, and then 2 hours later you get a call from the bank saying, have you actually heard of John Lewis before? Do you know they're a real company, or whatever they're doing? But I mean, this stuff could be nanoseconds when it's bots talking to other bots. So I think the actual level of service that can be delivered, the quality of it could be massively improved, I think.
Well, look, I really appreciate you both coming to talk about it. I know that the paper came out in the summer, and it was in the Journal of Banking.
Journal of Digital Banking.
Journal of Digital Banking. So look, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. And you two are some of the voices that are describing not only where we're going, but also how we're going to get there and what businesses should be doing. So I really appreciate it. Kirsty, thanks again for making time from Lloyds, and Dave from 15 Megabits. We will speak soon, but thanks again. We'll catch you next time.
Take care.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.